candles had burned almost to nothing. Catherine Howard was 19 years old, and she could hear footsteps moving toward her chamber at Hampton Court. Not the soft, familiar steps of her ladies-in-waiting, not servants carrying food or fresh linen, not anyone who should have been walking those corridors at 11 o'clock at night. Just 6 hours earlier, she had been Queen of England, wife to Henry VIII, the most powerful woman in the kingdom. A girl who had climbed out of near obscurity to wear the same crown Anne Boleyn had died for, and Jane Seymour had died wearing. Now she sat alone in her private rooms, forbidden to leave, watched by guards who would not meet her eyes, waiting for something she did not yet fully understand. The king had not come to see her. He had not sent a message. Henry, her husband of 16 months, the man who called her his rose without a thorn, the man who covered her in jewels and praised her beauty to ambassadors across Europe, had shut himself away in his own apartments, and for hours now had been weeping. She knew because she could hear him. The royal rooms at Hampton Court were built for splendor, not privacy. Sound traveled through the walls, and Henry Tudor, King of England, was sobbing like a man whose world had just been shattered. Then the footsteps stopped outside her door. A knock followed, formal, official, unavoidable. "Enter," Catherine said. Her voice did not shake. In 16 months as queen, she had learned how to control her voice even when her heart was racing. The door opened, and Archbishop Thomas Cranmer stepped inside. His face wore an expression of gentle concern, but his eyes were cold. Behind him stood guards, more guards than anyone would need for a simple visit from the Archbishop of Canterbury. "Your Majesty," Cranmer said. The title sounded different now. This morning it had been respect. Tonight it sounded like accusation. "I come on the king's business," he continued. "There are matters that must be discussed." "At this hour?" "The matters are urgent. They concern your conduct before your marriage to His Majesty, and during it." The words hit her like stones thrown into still water. She felt the shock move outward in ripples, felt the meaning settle in. Someone had talked. Someone had told. And everything she had built, everything she had survived to become, was beginning to collapse. What you're about to hear is the real story of Catherine Howard's destruction. Not the execution itself, which lasted only seconds, but the 3 months of fear, isolation, interrogation, and psychological torment that came before it. Most historians focus on the charges: adultery, treason, betrayal. They list the arrests, the confessions, the legal process that turned a queen into a condemned woman. But they rarely stop to ask what those months actually felt like. What did it mean to be cut off from everyone you trusted? To be questioned again and again while the people around you were arrested one by one? To sit in silence day after day while your entire world was dismantled piece by piece and never know if you were going to be forgiven or killed? Tonight, we are going to follow Catherine through all of it. The accusations that began her fall, the confessions pulled out of others under pressure, the betrayals, the desperate attempts to survive, the waiting at Sion Abbey, the journey to the Tower, the final hours before the blade came down. And to understand how it all happened, we have to go back, before the crown, before Henry, before Hampton Court, to the girl Catherine was before she ever became queen. Catherine was born around 1523. No one bothered to record the exact date. At the time, she was not important enough for that. She was the daughter of Lord Edmund Howard, a man who was always in debt, always chasing favor, and never truly able to provide for his family. Her mother died while Catherine was still young, and her father sent her away to live in the household of her step-grandmother, the Dowager Duchess of Norfolk. There she was raised among a large crowd of other young relatives, wards, servants, and children. It was a busy household, wealthy and noble on the surface, but badly supervised underneath. The girls slept together in one large dormitory known as the Maiden's Chamber, and at night, when the older women had gone to bed and order slipped away, things happened in that room that would follow Catherine for the rest of her life. When she was perhaps 13, her music teacher, Henry Mannix, began paying her special attention. At first, it may have seemed flattering. Then it became something else. Years later, Mannix would admit that he had touched her intimately, that she had allowed liberties that stopped short of full intercourse. No one at the time asked whether a child of 13 could truly understand what was happening. No one asked whether she had meaningfully consented. What mattered later was far simpler and far crueler. Catherine Howard had been touched before she married the king. After Mannix came Frances Dereham. Dereham was a secretary in the Dowager Duchess's household. Young, attractive, ambitious, and close enough to Catherine to become dangerous. He began visiting the Maiden's Chamber at night, part of a wider pattern of carelessness in that household, where young men had learned the rules were rarely enforced. But what grew between Catherine and Dereham was more than stolen flirtation. By most accounts, it became a sexual relationship. They called each other husband and wife. They exchanged gifts. They spoke as if they had a future together. Years later, this would become one of the most important questions in her downfall. Had Catherine and Dereham entered into a pre-contract of marriage? Because if they had, then her later marriage to Henry VIII could be argued to be invalid from the start. Catherine would deny that any binding promise had ever been made. Dereham would insist that it had. The truth was probably far messier than either version allowed. Two young people meeting in secret, speaking recklessly, with no adult guidance and no real understanding of the legal weight their words might carry. But in Tudor England, messy truth mattered less than useful interpretation. And by the time Catherine Howard arrived at court at 16 or 17, she carried a past with her. A past that others knew. A past servants had seen, whispered about, remembered. A past that could be turned into a weapon the moment anyone chose to investigate it. And in November 1541, someone did. So let's go back to Hampton Court. Cranmer did not come into Catherine's room empty-handed. He brought papers, documents covered in handwriting she could not read from where she sat, but she knew what they were. Testimony, statements, words given by people she had once known, people she had once trusted, people who had now decided that saving themselves might require destroying her. "Your Majesty," Cranmer began, "I must ask you about your time in the household of the Dowager Duchess of Norfolk, specifically about your relationships with certain men who resided or served there. I do not understand what you mean. I think you do." His tone remained soft, almost priestly, the voice of a confessor, not an executioner, but that only made it worse. "We have received testimony from multiple witnesses," he said. "Testimony describing conduct unbecoming of a maid, let alone a queen." "What witnesses?" "I am not at liberty to reveal their names, but their accounts are detailed and consistent." Then he began naming them. Henry Mannix, Frances Dereham, and then, after a pause that felt deliberate, another name, Thomas Culpeper. That one hit differently. The accusations about Mannix and Dereham were humiliating, yes, but they belonged to the past. Damaging, possibly catastrophic, but still the past. Thomas Culpeper was something else. Thomas Culpeper belonged to the present, to the court, to the life she had as queen, to the danger she could still be condemned for. "I have done nothing improper since becoming queen," Catherine said. "The witnesses suggest otherwise." "There were reports," Cranmer said, "of private meetings, meetings at night, meetings arranged with the help of Lady Rochford, who stood watch while Catherine and Culpeper were left alone together." Culpeper, the man who had shown her tenderness in a world where tenderness was rare. The man who looked at her with warmth Henry once had, before age, illness, and possessiveness had changed him. The man whose company had become not only a comfort, but a risk. "I have spoken with Master Culpeper," Catherine answered carefully, "as I have spoken with many gentlemen at court. There is nothing improper in conversation." "The conversations were private," Cranmer said. "They took place at night. Lady Rochford kept watch. Tell me, Your Majesty, what requires a lookout if nothing improper was happening?" She had no answer that could save her. There was no version of the truth that would satisfy him now. "I will require from you," Cranmer continued, "a full account of your conduct, before marriage and during it. You may write it yourself, or dictate it to a secretary, but it must be complete. His Majesty requires honesty." "And if my account does not match the testimony? Then there will be further questions." He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. The threat was already there. Women of noble birth were not commonly tortured, but everyone around them could be pressured, threatened, broken. Friends, servants, allies, anyone who had kept her secrets could be made to speak. And if they spoke differently from her, that difference itself could be used as proof of guilt. "I will write it," Catherine said. "You shall have it by morning." "I will wait." Cranmer sat down near the door. He was not leaving. He would watch her write. He would take the account straight from her hands. He would make sure she had no chance to speak to anyone, no chance to compare stories, no chance to prepare a defense. She was already cut off. The isolation had begun. Before we go any further, you need to understand something about how Tudor investigations worked, because without that, you cannot fully grasp what Catherine was about to endure. This was not a system designed to discover truth. It was a system designed to produce confession. When the Tudor state turned its attention on someone, it did not simply ask questions and accept answers. It built a case from every possible angle. Investigators gathered testimony from anyone who might know anything: servants, relatives, former friends, enemies, anyone who had ever been near the accused. They questioned them repeatedly. They compared answers. They looked for contradictions. And when those contradictions appeared, as they always did, they used them. People who refused to cooperate faced consequences. Lesser figures could lose their positions, their livelihoods, their freedom. More important figures could be charged themselves with concealing treason, with failing to report what they knew, with being complicit. The pressure was overwhelming, and under that pressure, people talked. They told investigators what they knew, what they thought they knew, what they suspected, what they feared, and sometimes what they believed investigators wanted to hear. Once enough testimony had been gathered, the focus shifted to the accused. Their statements were compared against everything already collected. Every inconsistency became evidence. Every missing detail became suspicion. And in matters touching the king's honor, even the appearance of deception could be treated as a crime. For Catherine Howard, this meant something terrifying. Her fate did not depend only on what she said. It depended on what everyone else said, and everyone else was being questioned at the same time. That night, under Cranmer's watch, Catherine began to write. She had to make decisions with no way of knowing what had already been said about her, what to admit, what to deny, what to soften, what might save her, and what might condemn her. She admitted to Henry Mannix. She wrote that he had touched her, that she had allowed behavior she should not have allowed. But she was careful, very careful, to insist that it had never gone further. No full intercourse. That distinction mattered. It could determine whether her marriage to Henry had been valid. She admitted to Francis Derham. She acknowledged the relationship, the intimacy, the nights in the maiden's chamber. But she denied there had ever been a pre-contract of marriage. No promise. No binding agreement. She framed it as youthful foolishness, something that had happened to her in a household without proper supervision, something she had not fully understood. And then she came to Thomas Culpeper. Here she gambled. She admitted the meetings. She had to. Too many people had seen them. Too many witnesses already existed. But she denied everything else.